Ranjeet, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me here.
Absolutely. So, Ranjeet, I want to start with the beginning of the story, right? I mean, MBA, engineering, regular corporate rigmarole. How did Pratilipi happen? What was going on in your mind? What triggered the whole Pratilipi story right at the beginning?
Sure. So from very beginning of my childhood, I have been a voracious reader, and just like most people my age and from my background, I started by reading Hindi comics. Then I started
Hmm.
reading contemporary Hindi literature, then first classical Hindi literature, then contemporary Hindi literature. Then I went to pursue my engineering, and I realized that Hindi content was simply not available that much. So I
Yeah.
started cribbing to my friends that, this is not the world that I want to live in. Somebody should solve this. I should be able to read in whatever language I want. But shifted to English because there was no other option. Then went and did my MBA, then worked at Vodafone for a couple of years. Then I quit my job and I was trying to decide what to do next. Around this time, some of my friends called me back and said that, you have been cribbing about this for half a decade. And if nobody else has solved this, why don't you give it a shot? And
Hmm.
that was basically the genesis of Pratilipi, that language should not be a barrier for people to do anything. But most importantly, read stories, because that was a personal problem.
Hmm. No, amazing, because I think somehow the world is coming to that, right? About a decade ago, English was the main language. It was the language of access. Right? If you didn't know English, you didn't know how to use your cutlery, it was said that you will not enter civil services and so on and so
Yep.
forth. They will not make it to the interview. I'm from Bihar, and the saying in Bihar is कि जूता कहीं भी हो लेकिन polished cherry blossom का चाहिए.
Yep.
Right? And English was that polished language. Right? And today we are coming to a stage where, language is the big deal, right? Look at all the platform, whether it's Google, Facebook, even in marketing. In fact, at Leo Burnett, we just set up what we call Leo Burnett Regional. So we are now, rather than think marketing campaigns in English, we are thinking campaigns in languages, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I hope the data is right. There are about 36 million people on the Pratilipi platform, right? Talk to us about who are these people? Who are these people? Where are they coming from? And more importantly, what are they getting out of this platform?
Right. So now we have 5 different products. The largest one is still online literature. So I'll talk primarily about that, because other platforms or other products would have like different user bases and different demographics.
Hmm.
But for the literature platform, people literally come from all over the world in different ways, from different demographics. So at a high level, for example, about 3.5% of our users are from outside India. A vast majority of them Indians who are living outside, but also some natives.
Wow.
Then about 48% of people come from top 7 cities in India. And then the remaining people come from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns and places. In terms of gender, we are one of the most women-centric platforms in India. So about 52-53% of our users are women, and then about 47-48% are men.
Hmm.
Predominantly younger population, which is something that people don't guess when they think about Pratilipi, but about 68% of our users are between 18 to 34.
Wow.
But we also have a sizable audience of people who are above 55 or 60.
And where do you see, growth coming from? Where do you see your next billion users will come from?
Right. So what is going to happen more and more is that it's not that outside India is not going to grow, or tier 1 cities are not going to grow. But I think more and more the share of users from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 will continue to grow at a much faster pace. So if metro audience on Pratilipi is, let's say, growing at 30% year on year or 20% year on year, the non-metro audience or the tier 3 audience is growing at much more than 100%, 150% year on year. So vast
Hmm.
majority of growth is going to be even more younger people coming from even smaller places all the time.
Hmm. One of the other things that I wanted to touch upon, Ranjit, was that your kind of professed goal is reducing poverty through meaningful education, right? You've spoken about that, giving access to storytellers and readers across languages. Where does that goal and mission come from, and what are the other ways that you are enabling this? What are the other ways other people can enable this? Let's talk about that, because that's very fascinating for me.
So just to be clear, that's my personal goal as Ranjeet, not as the CEO of Pratilipi.
Sure.
So this is the mission that I want to work towards as a person, primarily
Yeah.
because I come from a lower middle class family, and the single biggest reason why I'm here is because I even knew that there is something called engineering. So like in my village or nearby, maybe 50, 60 villages, I was the first engineer, literally, not figuratively. And after that, there have been at least 15, 16 people who have either pursued engineering degree or who are pursuing now, just because they have a role model and they understand that there's something called engineering that they can pursue.
Yeah.
And considering you are from Bihar, you would have seen that there would be villages where there would be a lot of people who are IS. There would be villages where there are a lot of people in army. There
Yeah.
would be villages where there are a lot of doctors.
Yeah.
And that is because once one person does something, like
Yeah.
everybody else has someone to look forward to. And which is where I think education has two parts. One part is about learning, or one part is about curriculum, teachers, and things like that. And the second part is just about role models, or visions, or aspirations, or dreams. And this is the part that Pratlipi is personally, as in Pratlipi as a company is solving. So the premise is less about teaching you something. The premise is more about showing you what all is possible. And I think stories give you that hope or that vision of what is possible. When you read Harry Potter and you go through that, there's someone who went through so many challenges to achieve so much while also doing the right thing all the time, standing by the values that he believed in. I think that helps you become a better person. That helps you go through adversities in life. So that is what Pratlipi's approach has been. But in other cases, I also either invest directly in or try and help founders where their company's missions are more about, let's say, giving access to knowledge, or giving access to community, or giving access to financial services. So anything that helps people like live a more meaningful life is something that personally I'm excited about.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. And so would you see that Pratilipi as a platform would also extend itself beyond just storytelling, and in this direction? Would there be, for example, a your story for the other India, hypothetically, or would you get into those platforms, or would you still stay as core as storytelling?
So it's hard to see how the future will unfold, and never say never, but it's unlikely. I think we want
Right.
to go into areas where we have like some reasonable probability of actually winning the market, because it's not. So I think having good vision and mission is really important, but you also have to think about what is sustainable, especially
Yeah.
when you are operating as a for-profit entity and you have raised money from venture capital investors. So you have to look at what makes financial sense as well.
Yeah.
So we would want to go into areas where there's a reasonable chance that we can actually succeed. And if we go into areas which are not related to storytelling, chances are that we are no better than any other competitor, and chances are that we are going to lose against them. So it's unlikely, but never say never.
Sure. Absolutely. Shifting to what works today, Ranjit, right? With younger audiences, short video platforms are going through the roof, right? More the merrier. And the whole theory is, or at least the propounded theory is, that they have shorter attention spans, and videos work better than text. My counter to that also is that at the same time, the same audience which binge watches for 15 hours. So it's not that you have a shorter attention span, it's the bar for
Exactly.
interestingness has gone up, right? So that's my personal theory. But the popular belief is young, snappy content video is what really works. Where are you on that? Especially because the bulk of Pratilipi format is actually text.
Right. So I actually agree with you, and this has been one of my more controversial opinions, not just right now, for last 7, 8, 10 years.
Yeah.
That most people just don't look at data in a deep enough manner, and they just make lazy generalizations. It's not that people's attention spans are going down. If you look at any of the platforms, and I'll give some examples, it's actually that their engagements are improving over a period of time. What has happened is that people simply have more and more options today, which means that the bar of what is acceptable to the audience has gone significantly up. Back in the day, if you had only one TV channel or one newspaper, whatever they served you is what you're going to consume, because, well, you did not have any other options. Today, if you launch a show even on Netflix, if I don't like it, I take 30 seconds to move on to a different show. But if you give me a Game of Thrones, I am going to binge watch it till the time it ends. And it's not about just Netflix. The same is true for YouTube. The same is true for books. The same is true for like podcasts. The same is true for every single format that you can imagine. You have to give me great content. The format, or the size of the format, matters much less. And another example around this is that TikTok has been the poster child of short video content, and both TikTok globally and, more importantly, Douyin in China, which kind of is a few years ahead of
Yeah.
TikTok, they have both been pushing for longer and longer and longer content. So now TikTok actually allows, I think, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes videos. In China, they have already been pushing video of length up to 15, 20 minutes. So literally the poster child of shorter attention span, or like the prime example that people give, is one of the companies that has been pushing more and more longer form content. The same is true for YouTube. Over last 7-8 years, every year YouTube is pushing for longer and longer and longer videos. So anybody who looks into deep data long enough, they know that this is not true. It's just a lazy generalization. But lazy generalizations sell.
And what about reading versus video, right? I mean, I am also an author, and my publishers are always cribbing that, look at the bookstore sizes. They're all shrinking, and now the front facade is filled with Barbie dolls and chewing gums, and books are increasingly receding. However, the vernacular language is obviously going up. Even in newspapers, vernacular is going up because there's more literacy. People are coming in. What's the pattern you're seeing in reading and text and stories?
So there are two things here. One is physical versus digital. The second is text versus
Okay.
audio versus video. So if you
Yeah.
look at the physical world, sure, bookstore sizes are going down. There are no CD stores or DVD stores anymore. So
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with format. That has to do with the digital offers you just so much better accessibility, so much better reach, so much better unit economics.
It's about distribution, you're saying.
Exactly. So when you look at just bookstores and compare that to Netflix, it's not a fair comparison. You want to compare bookstores, you compare that with like CD stores or DVD stores.
Yeah.
And like literally you would find, I don't know, 30 CD or DVD bookstores in entire Bangalore, maybe less.
Yeah.
And even they would actually be selling 50,000 other things, and CD DVDs would be a small part of what they're selling, versus there would be standalone bookstores in like every major locality in Bangalore. It's more about that, as I talked about, digital versus physical versus audio or video versus text. On the second part, I think the line is blurring between what is video, what is audio, what is text. So if you look at more mature economies, you will see that there are newer and newer formats of content that are coming up, and it's hard to say whether they are text or video or audio. Like think of, for example, Snapchat. It's hard to say whether that's video or audio because it's something different. Or look at one of my favorite products called Naver Webtoon, and they produce comicses. These comicses or web comics, it's hard to say whether they are like text or video or audio because it is the same comics that has images and text, but there's also background music coming in. There might even be a video component to that. So I think it's less about formats, and there are certain kinds of content that work better in one format. There are certain kinds of content that work better in a different format. And it's more about that just people's needs are evolving, and we have to kind of walk up with that. So at Pratlipi, for example, we never say that we have to increase the number of readers in the country or the world, or we have to increase the number of podcast listeners. What we want to do is we want to give you options. If you want to listen to a great podcast, you should be able to listen to a great podcast. If you want to read a great story, you should be able to read a great story. If you want to watch a great movie, you should be able to do that. So the understanding is that we don't want to tell you which language, which format to listen to or watch to or read. What we want to do is that you should have access to everything, and then you get to decide. If you decide to watch a movie, great. You want to play a game, even better. You want to read, great. Like it doesn't matter. It's up to the end consumer. It's just that we want to give you all those choices.
And you also feel that, say, the way manga is taken on in the West and with the new generation, you feel that some of those newer formats will take off in India as well. They'll work for the Indian audience as well.
So we have a product called Pratlipi Comics, and I am very, very excited about that.
Yeah.
And Pratlipi Comics is basically telling Pratlipi stories largely, but also outside stories in a comical format, suited towards mobile screen. Very, very excited, very, very optimistic about that.
Yeah. I mean, comics were very big when I was growing up, and there's no reason why I should not.
I think till early 90s, India was one of the largest comic reading markets in the world. And then suddenly we went to one of the smallest.
Yeah, and you're reviving that piece.
We are trying to.
Amazing. And so this wouldn't be a franchise of an Indrajal or a Tintin or whatever. This would be your own homegrown Indian brand of comics, right?
So internet is much bigger than the offline version was. That is like saying YouTube is a franchise of whatever movie viewer was there before, or Airbnb is a franchise for Marriott. Airbnb, if it succeeds, it would be many times bigger than Marriott. If YouTube succeeds, it would be many times bigger than any of the movie producers. So the internet gives you unprecedented scale. So if Pratlipi Comics wins, it's not going to be like what Raj Comics or Manoj Comics or Diamond Comics look like. And I am a huge fan of them personally. It's just that internet works in a slightly different manner. So if Pratlipi Comics succeeds, we will be many times larger than every single comic publisher in the physical world combined.
You're saying just because of the sheer scale of distribution that
Sheer
digital
scale is
allows.
one part. The other part is that the variable cost is very close to zero. So like
Yes.
once we produce a comic, it doesn't matter if 5 people read it or 5 million people read it. My cost is roughly the same.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a very insightful point. Ranjit, let's talk about monetization, right? I mean, many platforms are now talking about it, right? I mean, Google, Meta to TikTok, they've all been talking about monetization. Pratilipi now has its own subscription plans. So, how are you focusing on, building greater value both for Pratilipi, the organization, and the creators on the platform, and what's the path ahead on that piece?
Right. So I think as I was talking about just 30 seconds back, right? Like, so there are companies on the internet, especially in the internet economy, where your marginal cost is very close to zero. So for companies where your marginal cost is close to zero, you ideally don't want to monetize till you get to critical mass. And which is where, for example, companies like Facebook or TikTok were spending a lot of money before they actually started monetizing. That is the right strategy. A lot of times, I think media somehow doesn't understand that. The ideal case scenario is that you want to be unit economics profitable. Then you get to a critical mass, and then you start focusing on like scaling your revenues. So we are still at the stage where we are focusing on value creation, which is that how much value do my creators and consumers get versus value capture. But we have started monetization and value capturing, as you said, just a few months back. The overall premise in which Prathipi is going ahead is what is the way in which we can capture some of the value that we are creating while ensuring that the value creation doesn't slow down. So we have nothing behind the paywall, even on our subscription products, for example. So it's not that if you want to read this, then you have to pay to Prathipi. It's more like if you subscribe to a creator or to Prathipi, you get some exclusive benefits. So for example, there is a feature called audio chat room. If you're a paying subscribers, you get access to that. Or for example, if you're paying subscribers, you can read the exact same story 3 days before everybody else reads it. But it's not that just because you don't have money to pay, you will not be able to read that story. So that is the way that we are looking at monetization for Prathipi.
So you're saying that the whole vision or mission for democratization will never go away. I mean, it will never be that.
At least for as long as I remain the CEO, that will not go away.
Yeah, but you're also then looking at, I mean, for example, about 2 months back, we did a shoot and we did it with an influencer. And the fee that the influencer was paid was very, very similar to a fee that a Bollywood celebrity would get paid. So that in that environment, right, things are kind of leveling up. I mean, not the norm of the river is beginning to level up. Do you also see that happening in this world of creation? That
I think very, very soon, top Prathipi writers will be making significantly more money than the top writers in the physical world. So last month, in fact, last 3 months consistently, two of our creators have made more than 1 lakh rupees a month, and neither of them are full-time writers. And people say writing is dead or literature is dead. This is just in royalty. That is it.
Amazing.
This doesn't take into account anything else. Like this doesn't take into account, for example, if we acquire their content, that's on top of this 1 lakh. How many writers in India make 1 lakh rupee on just royalty every month? Is probably not a very large number.
Yes.
And we have literally started monetization 4, 5, 6 months back. So I think over a period of time, what will happen is that everybody would have a chance, but some people will make exponentially more money than everybody else. That's always been the case. That will always be the case. It's just that earlier, most of the people simply did not have a choice. Like if you only think of Bollywood, for example, unless you had the right connections, you knew the right people, you had the right name, it was just impossibly hard to even get the first break.
Yeah.
Versus in the world of YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, you have a chance. That doesn't make it easy. It just means that there's some probability that if you are smart enough, if you are putting in hard enough work, and if you're just lucky enough, you might get there.
Yeah, you're actually democratizing discoverability.
Exactly.
So you don't have to fight for that. And after that, it's your hard work and consistency. But do you have a sense of what really works? I mean, is it just quality? Is it consistency? I mean, in authoring people, so you have to build an audience, right? And you have to keep coming back to the audience. But any insights on that?
So actually, you have answered the most important points. You have to build an audience. So you shouldn't have to think about, okay, Pratlipi has 36 million users. What do I do for 36 million users? You have to think about, okay, these are the 100 people who are reading me today. What do I do to make sure that these 100 people keep on liking me? So you basically create more frequently. You talk to your readers, try and understand what they are saying, take their feedback, make them feel good so that they go and talk to other 100 people about it. So I think these are the three most important parts: just keeping your audience like your audience, being consistent, and continue to improve.
Yeah, we had an influencer, Raj Shamani, on the show, and he said that he looks at his content as product market fit. Right? He's saying I'm a startup. I look at my content whether it's delivering to the needs of the people or not.
I think that is the right way to look at it. And similarly, for example, a lot of startups focus too much on their competition, and those startups rarely succeed. It's much
Yes.
better to think of that startup as like you care about your customers, and that is probably like 90% of what you do.
Yeah. No, awesome. I wanted to touch upon a bit on the role of technology. Right. So I mean, everywhere we are going, the other day I read somewhere in a brochure for a real estate place, the lobby was being claimed to be created through AI and ML. Right. So that's the kind of conversation that we are having around technology in India today, and globally as well. You've also there are no human editors on Pratilipi platform, I'm told, right? And it's all selected through technology. Talk to us a bit about the role of technology, how it is now, and how do you see this evolving in the game that you are in?
So just to be clear, we think that the right way to think about technology is as an enabler or as a leverage. So when you think of technology as an end in and of itself, I think usually you don't go anywhere. Sometimes you get lucky, but that's rare. Better way to think about is think of the problem that you're trying to solve. And sometimes the answer is a particular type of technology. Sometimes the answer is something else, and that's completely fine. So think of, for example, let's say maths. Just because you know addition or subtraction or multiplication doesn't mean that you're going to apply multiplication at every single place, right? Like you think of the problem and then you decide if you should use addition or subtraction or multiplication or something else. The same way it is, in my opinion, for technology. So there are areas where a certain kind of technology could be very useful. There are certain areas where a different kind of technology could be very useful. There are certain other areas where a human is much better than what technology is. So think of where we use technology the most, in Pratlipi's case at least. So for our literature product, we currently have about 5.5 million stories published on the platform. Is it even theoretically possible to have a human workforce that goes through 5.5 million stories to find out which stories are good or which stories are bad? That's just humanly impossible. And it's not that the number is static. It's like every month we are publishing about 250,000 new stories. That's more than the entire industry combined. Like if you combine every single publisher in the country, offline or online, all of them combined will not publish more than 250,000 stories in a year. We do that in a month. So it's impossible to curate those stories manually, and which is where technology becomes a tool. And within technology, which is where machine learning becomes a much better tool than other types of technologies, because machine learning gets better with the amount of data that we feed into the system. Versus there are other parts. So think of, for example, IVM, where we don't use ML to figure out which podcast should go into what direction. We actually use human wisdom and experiences to decide what kind of host, for example, would be good for IVM. What kind of guest should come onto the platform? What kind of questions should we ask? Because in this specific case, human wisdom or experience is actually a better answer. So it's not about whether technology is better or humans are better or something else is better. It's about focusing on the problem and then figuring out what is the best kind of solution that works in this scenario.
Yeah. So I'm personally curious a bit more, Ranjeet, around how do you use AI ML in curating stories? Do they feed on what's kind of floating, what's getting better readership, or do they actually develop a judgment of content over a period of time?
So there are two parts to what we do right now. One part is essentially, let's call it negative recommendation, which is basically about content that should not be there on the platform in the first place, which is illegal in one way or form. So think of, for example, copyright violation. Think of, for example, hate speech. Think of incitement to violence. So then here the premise is fairly simple, that the algorithm has been trained over content that is legal and content that is not legal, or content that is like significantly similar to something else. So just to be clear, it's not 100% accurate. So for example, copyright violation, it's very hard to say if something, as in sometimes something is a blatant copy, but sometimes it's hard to say whether something is as an inspiration or something is a copyright violation. So we try and get to as much accuracy as we can in trying to identify these cases and weeding out these cases. That is one part of ML. The second part of ML is largely around what is the story that you would like. And my favorite example to give has always been Harry Potter. So there are some of my friends who believe that Harry Potter is one of the greatest books ever written. There are some of my friends who think Harry Potter is absolute shit. There are some of my friends who think that Harry Potter is great, but it's not Lord of the Rings. It's like great for kids, but like not for adults or not for teenagers. Now the
Yeah.
story is the same. It's just that your tastes differ. So the
Yeah.
premise of the recommendation or personalization is more about
Right.
figuring out what kind of stories you are likely to write. So then we'll look at a bunch of different parameters. So we'll look at your own reading history. We'll make a social graph of people who are similar to you and what they have read and liked, but you haven't. But we'll also have a content-based graph where we'll look at different contents and see, okay, these two stories have similar in nature. And then if you like this story, then maybe you'll like this story. So all of
Yeah.
this forms the basis of ML or where we utilize it. There is a third angle, which is much smaller, which is about helping our creators. So for example, or even consumers. So for example, you are writing a story and you're using a word that you don't like. So what are the words which are similar to that word that you can probably use
Wow.
instead of this word? Or for example, you are a reader and you don't know what this word means. So finding out, okay, what is the simpler meaning of the word or the phrase that somebody is using? So these kind of things are probably the third bucket where we use machine learning.
Nice. Yeah. Very, very interesting. And are you doing a lot of effort at the end of supply creation as well, Ranjit, or is that being taken care of automatically? Are you curating writers? Uh, do you have an initiative to build that pipeline, or are you saying that more than enough? Every dining table in India has a story, and we don't need to work hard on that.
So honestly, I think this is one of the areas where we don't think we have done enough effort, both in terms of attracting new creators, but also creators who are already on the platform, helping them become better and helping them be more successful. So from very early on, we have done some efforts. So for example, we have something called Writers Academy, where top creators have created series on how to become a better writer in different ways. We do some workshops. We have a team called author relationship managers who work with some of these people to help them become better. But I think there's a lot more work that we need to do on this. We have done some other partnerships where we have worked with some schools and colleges on like helping budding writers come onto Prakliti, or just even if not Prakliti, just write somewhere, write in a diary, write on a paper, it doesn't really matter. But I think
Yeah.
this is an area where we need to do a lot more work. I don't think
Sure.
we have done nearly enough.
Yeah. I want to switch gears to podcasts. I mean, something that we are doing and something that, I mean, I got into it because we were saying, okay, we are a new age agency. We should, work with new formats. And I said, what's a better way to work with a new format than learn it yourself? And
Right.
I got into say, we will do five podcasts and see how it goes. And now we are 20 speakers down already. So
Right.
how do you see that? I mean, you've obviously acquired IVM, one of the largest platforms, and how do you see the market or the potential for voice different from reading, or do you see all as part of the same continuum?
So I think so. Okay, so this is one part where I again disagree with a lot of the world. I think
Yeah.
audio globally and India is still very small. We simply don't have a large enough market.
Yeah.
But give it 5 years, and actually I don't know if it is 6 months or 5 years or 10 years.
Yeah.
But in as in fairly, let's say, short time of time, I believe that audio would be one of the major like formats of content creation and consumption. So every different format gives you certain advantages and certain disadvantages. Everything in life is generally a trade-off. For example, text is very easy to browse. You can very quickly, within 2-3 minutes, decide browsing through lines to decide whether you want to read this article or book or not. But like you cannot read while doing anything else. Like if you want to read
Yeah.
a book, you can just read, and that is it. And it kind of gives you a lot to think about because there's so much constraints that are there on the written word that if you're reading a book, you start creating a universe in your own mind because you have to imagine that. Versus think of video. Video is good in terms of discoverability compared to audio, but not as good as text. So you can click, watch a few scenes and decide, but it's still so much harder. There's a running joke that people use Netflix to decide what to watch, and then they just, by that time, they're already sleepy, so they turn off their
Yeah.
laptop and go to sleep.
Yeah.
That is because browsing is harder. And the advantage is, of course, you can watch something while you are doing something else compared to text, but not compared to audio. Audio is
Yeah.
impossibly hard to browse. And like, if you're not sure which podcast to listen to, you actually have to listen to a podcast. There's no other way.
Mm.
Like, it's
Mm.
impossibly hard to discover or browse to a podcast. And which is why podcast, in my opinion, is so much more discovery led and so much more brand name led. So most of the
Mm.
major podcasts are people like Joe Rogan, where Joe Rogan brings in his audience because people already know about Joe Rogan. There is nothing
Yeah.
to browse through.
Yeah.
But it gives you almost perfect parallel working. Like you can listen to a podcast or audiobook while you're running. You can listen to a podcast or audiobook or music, in fact, while you are coding or while you're cooking food. So I think That is one part. The second part is that there are certain use cases, as we were earlier talking about, where text is better, like where you want to engage your imagination, versus there are cases where video is much better, where you don't want to imagine, where you just want to actually feel what is happening. And audio is, I think, somewhere in between, where you don't want to like be 100% involved, but you also don't want to be spoon fed. You want that ability to imagine, but you also don't want to be doing just that. So for those kind of use cases, I think audio is great. Like for example, conversation. So when you're listening to a conversation between two people, in most cases, you probably don't want to be 100% focusing on that, but you also don't want it to just be in background. You want to actually listen to some parts and engage your brain in some parts. So for example, for conversations, I think audio is so much better than either video or text. And I think audio will evolve as this demand increases. I think we are still early, but at least I am 100% convinced that it's going to be very, very large over the next few years.
Yeah. I mean, I have always, for example, believed that, a mass scale use case, right? I mean, for example, imagine having Gurbani on audio, and we also do a lot of work with Spotify. They are a client, and we think a lot about how to make audio a bigger part of people's lives. And I'm like, can you do competition success review, civil services examination tips on audio?
Yep,
Because
exactly.
those are large scale India
Use cases.
use cases, right? Till you stay this whole very English polished world, it will stay a game of a few millions. But who according to you, Ranjit, is the audience right now on audio, and how do you think that panning out? Do you think it'll go the same direction as vernacular on text, or you think this will have a different trajectory?
So actually, again, you I think gave a very good answer yourself. So I think whenever a new technology comes in, you start by focusing at the top end of the users because they're easier to access to, and it doesn't matter again what you are talking about. So when e-commerce came in, they only focused on the top 20, 30 million users before they started going down. The same for ride hailing, the same for literature, the same for audio. So when audio or podcasting started, they started by focusing on the top 20, 30 million people because that was the easiest thing to do. But today, if you look at all the new age startups, including Pratlipi, including like Pocket FM, Kuku FM, Headphone, everybody is essentially going downwards and saying, okay, what can we do for a Hindi user or Malayalam user or somebody living in a small place in Bihar or UP or Maharashtra, and how do we get them to start consuming this content? And like larger corporates take some time, but I can guarantee that in streaming, we have already seen that Hotstar and Netflix and Prime are all going towards like the Indian language content. The same will happen with podcasts for larger players like Spotify as well. It's just a matter of time before they started doing that.
But you see the same trajectory,
curve would be similar. It's just that the time it takes might be different. Like the path to get there might be different.
Yeah. Very interesting. Switching gears to your investments, right? I mean, obviously, so there are many sides to you, Ranjit, obviously, right? Running the organization, content. So Anar B2B, social media, Kutum. I mean, what are you looking for when you're investing? I mean, what's the principle that you're looking at? And what are you growing there?
So honestly, I don't think of myself as an investor at all. I spend 10% of my time helping others in general. This is something that I have done for quite some time. That is largely because a bunch of people helped me. It's just a way of giving back. It's just that sometimes if I find a founder that I believe is a smart, resourceful, and they want to try and do something good for the world, I want them to support in many ways, and money just happens to be one of those ways. So when I invest in a company, it's not about investment. It's not about financial returns. It's basically just about that there's a founder that I think has some probability of changing the world for the better, and I want to back. So that is my investment philosophy. It just so happens that it has worked out well and I have made some money out of it, but that is not why I invest.
Right. Very interesting. I want to talk a little, Ranjit, in retrospect, all stories sound very cool and interesting. And because we often cut in at a point in time when the person is extremely successful, right, and already made it. But I mean, behind every successful story, there's so much of pain. There's so many failures. What were a few things which were not working in your favor when you started off? What were some of the failures? Because there's so many people out there, Ranjit, who are wanting to start up, right? And midway through, they get really frustrated that, oh my God, nobody told us this is going to be so hard. Right. So what were some of the failures? What are the early hiccups that you're okay to talk about?
So far too many, and not just early on, even so obviously, because as a founder, you talk with other founders, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter what stage you are at, whether you haven't raised a single dollar or whether you are a unicorn, you are still going through challenges, you are still going through self-doubt on a daily basis. It's just that there are certain things that you would not feel comfortable talking about in the public world, but everybody is going through challenges. And you might have 6 good months or a good year where everything seems great, but you will get down to like earth and you will go through again those hell points that are going to come up. So like bunch of different things, including literally today. So just some of the examples when we started building Pratlipi, so Pratlipi from a business jargon perspective, when I say Pratlipi, I mean the literature product is an entirely
Yes.
UGC product, which what that
Yeah.
means is that people create content. Pratlipi doesn't do anything. Like the best example is a YouTube or a WhatsApp or a Facebook. So we don't create any of the content that is there on Pratlipi. We don't curate any of the content that is there on Pratlipi. For that kind of platforms haven't simply been built in India. Nobody has seen those kind of platforms till Pratlipi and ShareChat came along. What that meant was that it was impossibly hard to tell people why it is actually a good idea for certain kind of companies to not monetize. And this was the time when like the journalists and the gurus were talking about Flipkart most importantly, but some other companies, that these companies are still unprofitable, they are all going to die. And here is a company which is, forget about being unprofitable. It's a like the company doesn't generate any revenue whatsoever. And we are saying that we are not going to generate any revenue for another 3, 4, 5 years.
Wow.
Convincing our own parents, for example, like my mom, till about 6 months back when we launched monetization, she like every third call she will say, "How are you? Like, why are people working with you? How do you give people salaries if you're not taking any money?" Not easy. Similarly, like think of for any kind of UGC platform or a marketplace, you would have creators because you have readers. You would have readers because you have creators. Now, when you're starting up, how do you convince creators to come to your platform when you don't have any readers? Or why should a reader come onto Pratlipi's platform when you don't have enough high quality content?
Yeah.
Then by virtue of being a UGC platform, there will always be cases where there is some content on Pratlipi that should not be there on Pratlipi. Like copyright violation is the single biggest problem that we have faced, like even today, but today I think the algorithms have gotten much better. So the number of cases are much lower, but even now it happens, but it used to happen so very frequently till about 2 years back. And then you have to explain to a creator that why we were not able to catch a particular copyright violation. And a bunch of other things. Like one fine day, for example, a very key person in the team essentially says that, dude, you know what? Somebody else has offered me a 3x salary, and so I'm going to go. Like, how do you deal with that? Or someday, like, so a lot of these small things keep on coming up and piling on. Like literally last 3 weeks, we have been dealing with this, that one fine day, suddenly our retention took a deep dive. It went down by like 20%. We don't even know why that happened. How do we actually make it work? So like these kind of things, something or the other will keep on breaking down. You have to find a way to solve it and move on, and the new thing will break down and you have to solve it and move on. That's just how life is.
And I don't know if you're comfortable talking about it, but funding is a big conversation, right? And there's a whole spectrum there. I mean, everybody's dying to be a unicorn. A lot of our clients, in fact, in last 6 months have come to the table saying, we want to go for IPO. Prepare my brand for that. Get me discontinuous acquisitions, and so on. So that's become fashionable as well. Where are you on that piece? On funding, becoming a unicorn, going to IPO? Is that the path that you look for your group as well, or where are you on that piece?
Right. So it's not about funding or being a unicorn or IPO in my eyes. It's more about one that we want to do something good at a large enough scale. When I say good, as I was saying earlier, right? Like one is whether we are working in the service of the mission and the vision that we have stated. Second, are we doing it in a way that is actually sustainable? And that's actually sustainable not just for us, but also our team members, also our authors, our investors, and the society at large. Second, that we are very, very focused on, and I'm not sure if we've spoken to people who have worked at Pratip in the past, we are very, very careful about not just doing the right thing, but also about doing the right thing in the right manner. So we take a lot of pride in the work culture that we build. We take a lot of pride in how we act in general. And then fundraising or unicorn status or profitability or IPOs are just ways to get to that point. So for example, if we weren't able to raise a new financing round, that will mean that we will have to take different shortcuts. We might have had to monetize earlier, which would mean that my user experience would suffer or my growth would suffer. So for us, fundraise is more about what gives us leverage in terms of moving ahead towards the mission that we are talking about, versus like a milestone in and of itself. Same for IPO. It's just that your investors change. It's not like IPO is some kind of a magical moment. It is magical in the sense that now you suddenly have a lot more shareholders and a lot more people that you can help generate more wealth. But it's not magical in the sense that you had different shareholders or different investors earlier, and now you just have a different set of shareholders and investors. It's just much larger in number. So like we will go through an IPO if and when we like need that different set of investors. Otherwise, we'll not. We'll become a unicorn whenever we need enough capital that somebody is willing to give us in terms that make sense for the company. If it just so happens that it's also at a valuation above $1 billion, great. If not, who cares?
Amazing. And in this journey, Ranjeet, I mean, would you say that it's all learning by doing? You've kind of gone through this by making your own mistakes, learning yourself, or have you had privilege of having mentors or somebody guiding you? Are you being a mentor? What's your view on that piece?
So, okay, so there are two parts to it. I think I have learned from a lot of different people. In fact, this is why I spend 10% of my time helping others, because a bunch of people have helped me in the past. So this is not because I am a very nice guy or I am Gautam Buddha. It's more like different people have helped me, and it's just my chance now to do the same thing for others. And hopefully they will do for other people, like the next generation after them. But it has never been a formal relationship like having a mentor or advisor. It's like these are friends or people. Don't focus too much on media or experts, focus on your customers and what they are actually saying. Like they are the people who are going to be using your product. They are the people who are going to make it successful or a failure.
Yeah, you're saying think about what you're going to do rather than the environment so much. I mean, be more internal focused and self-obsessed rather than context obsessed.
Yep, self-focused and customer-focused versus competition-focused or VC-focused or media-focused.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ranjeet, for this conversation. This is also the point in time where, in the format of this podcast, we switch the mic, and you get to ask me questions.
This is interesting, and I don't think I have done this before. What has been your like most interesting conversation on this podcast that you have had till now?
Lots of conversation. Actually, it's difficult to point one or two, but I think the conversation with Raj Shamani, right? He's a 24-year-old influencer, Ranjeet, right? Started working when he was 16 or 17, right? And in today's day and age, right, when we say that, Gen Z is different and millennials are different, I think that conversation was fascinating. And the kind of clarity he had at this early stage of how he's looking at his product himself, it was so sorted. I mean, it was baffling to me. So that was a very interesting conversation.
That is great to hear. What is an opinion that you hold that you think most of your colleagues will disagree with?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a big fan of intensity, right? So around this whole work-life balance and what is work and what is life, I feel that if you're intense about something, right, boundaries kind of merge, right? And I feel that's a very counter unpopular opinion. And if you're really intense about anything, right, then you will put in whatever is required. Which is, I'm not saying burnout. I mean, you'll have high intense times and low intense times, but I am unable to find a very clinical way of saying this is work and this is life. I mean, my belief is that the world revolves, the real world which makes a difference revolves around the idea of intensity.
Fair enough. You have been a creator in at least two forms that you have already told me about. There could be other forms. You have written a book and you are running a podcast. As a creator, not as a business person, as a creator, what has been the difference in your opinion about creating a podcast versus creating a book?
Yeah. So the book is a very inward journey, right? I mean, you write for about 6 to 8 months at a stretch. And that's how I write, right? And it's a very inward journey. You're ruminating in yourself, and you also get time to go back, edit, right? You write something, you say, oh my God, this is terrible, right? I mean, this is all faff, all bullshit. I can't put my name to this. And you go back and you rewrite. So there's a lot of editing, sculpturing. I liken writing to sculpturing, right? You put something there, you give it shape, you go back, you re-edit, and finally something very beautiful comes out, which you are happy putting your name to, right? Podcast, on the contrary, is on the go, right? I mean, you're doing it. Once you've spoken, once recorded, is gone. I don't go back and listen to again. I don't sit on the editing table of what to keep, what not to keep. So in one, you have a lot more control. The other is free flow. You just let go, and you hope that the right things come and add up. So one is, retrograde, other is thing happening as it comes.
Okay, last question. Uh, like something about the future that you're excited about, something about the future that you're scared of.
So what I'm excited about really, Ranjit, is, I mean, and a lot of my work, and I worked in the region, etc. And now I'm quite India focused, and I'm a big Indophile, and I mean, all my books are in on India. When I go abroad and I speak about, it's all about how India is buoyant and so on and so forth. I'm excited about now finally the next 500 million, 600 million people coming into the consuming class, right? For a long time, it was just a faff that some of the consulting companies sold. I mean, India wasn't a billion people market. It was just a 50 million people. I mean, I did some number cutting, and only 50 million households in India had access to a two-wheeler, right? So what were we talking about? I mean, 600 million people did not have access to toilets and clean drinking water. So what I'm now excited about is that in the last about a decade, this 500 million audience is coming of age, and that opens a very different dynamic of the marketplace of what you want to do. So that's what I'm really excited about. What worries me is, would we still have the resources to cater to the needs of these people, right? And resources, I mean, in terms of everything, would we be able to create employment? Would we be able to give them access to skill-based education, not just certificate-based education? Would we be able to change mindsets enough for to be able to harness the minds of these 500 million people? So that's what comes to my mind when you ask me that question.
Okay, so how did I do as your job?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ranjeet, for making time. Amazing conversation. Lots of things to learn and reflect around.
Of course, it was a pleasure to be here. A different podcast in many, or a different interview in many different ways. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah. Cheers and all the very best.
Thank you.